The orc woman thought she'd be sent to the fields. The human seated her by the hearth. The first thing Marin noticed about the alien was that she sat like someone waiting to be punished. It was the posture that gave it away. Not the mandibles tucked tight against the jaw, not the compound eyes held studiously forward, not the careful way the Vorkai woman's 6 limbs were folded against her thorax, in the submissive configuration that Marin had read about exactly once in a colonial protocol pamphlet. It was the way she had chosen the seat farthest from the warmth of the thermal exchange unit. The seat nearest the wall. The seat with the clearest sightline to the exit hatch. Marin had spent 6 years working intake processing on colonial transport vessels. She knew that posture. She'd worn it herself once, in a different life, when she was 19 and terrified and sitting in a recruiter's office on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, certain she was about to be told that she didn't qualify for the only program that might get her off-world. She picked up 2 cups of protein broth from the dispenser, crossed the common room, and set one on the table in front of the alien without a word. Then she pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The Vorkai woman stared at the cup for a long moment. Her antennae moved in small, careful arcs. "The fluid," she said finally, in the careful flat-tone standard that all the Vorkai aboard had been using. "Is this an obligation or a gift?" "Neither," Marin said. "It's warm. The recycled air in here runs cold at this altitude, and you've been sitting in that corner for 3 hours." Another long pause. The alien's handling limbs, the smaller pair, delicate-fingered, nothing like the massive lower arms that could tear a pressure door off its housing, unfolded from beneath her thorax and touched the cup. "Among my kind," the Vorkai woman said, "when a captor provides warmth, it signals that the captive has been selected for the processing pens." Marin looked at her over the rim of her own cup. "You're not a captive, you're a passenger. The distinction has not been explained to the 8 of us." Marin set her cup down. This was the problem with emergency mixed manifest transports, she thought. You loaded them fast, you got everyone aboard. You sealed the airlocks because the quarantine klaxon was already screaming. And then 3 hours into the transit you realized that the 8 Vorkai refugees you'd taken on at Threshold Station had been sitting in a corner of your common room for the better part of a shift, because nobody had thought to explain to them that the door wasn't locked. "I'll fix that," Marin said. "Tonight, I'll do a briefing for everyone, where to sleep, how to eat, how to get help if you need it." She paused. "My name is Marin Schultz. I'm the intake officer. My job is to make sure everyone aboard is comfortable and accounted for." The alien regarded her for another long moment. The compound eyes were a deep amber in the low light, faceted and unreadable in the way that human eyes weren't, but the small secondary eyelids, the ones Marin had read about in the same pamphlet, the ones that indicated what the author had optimistically called emotional transparency, flicked twice in quick succession. "I am called Vexareth," the alien said. "Among my caste the name indicates I am of the builder's line." A pause. "It has no status meaning here." "Sure it does," Marin said. "You built things, that's good. We've got a lot that needs fixing on this ship." She watched the secondary eyelids flick again. She wondered if that was the Vorkai equivalent of a small, surprised laugh. The Srichenfin's daughter was 43 days into a 62-day transit when the body turned up. Marin found it in the secondary cargo corridor on Deck 4, tucked into the space behind a coolant exchanger that hadn't worked since before she'd signed on. She'd gone down there because one of the passenger manifest systems had flagged an anomaly, a biometric sensor reading a heartbeat in a location where no passenger should be, and she'd figured it was a malfunction. It wasn't a malfunction. The body belonged to a man named Gregor Fash, a civilian contractor, mid-40s, who had been traveling alone in passenger class, and had spent the first 3 weeks of the transit being loudly unpleasant to everyone who crossed his path. He had opinions about Vorkai aboard human vessels. He had expressed them frequently, and at volume in the common room. He had been dead for approximately 18 hours. Marin crouched beside him in the narrow space and turned on her torch and tried to think very carefully and very clearly about what she was looking at. The body was intact. There were no wounds that she could see. The expression on Gregor Fash's face was not fear, exactly. It was more like the total blankness of a man who had looked at something and had his entire understanding of the universe revised before his nervous system had time to register the update. She'd seen that expression on a face before, on a recording actually. A ship's camera feed from the HSV Coronel, 8 months ago, right before it had gone dark. She stood up slowly, walked back to the main corridor, sealed the deck hatch behind her, and spent approximately 30 seconds doing the kind of controlled breathing she'd learned from a meditation app she downloaded in a different era of her life. Then she went to find Captain Arun. Captain Arun Fetsavan was a 50-year-old man who had been flying colonial transports for 25 years and who had developed, over that time, a calm so profound that it had occasionally been mistaken for indifference. He looked at the security footage Marin had pulled from the Deck 4 cameras, and he was quiet for a very long time. "The footage cuts," he said. 11 minutes and 40 seconds, starting at 02:17 ship time, Marin confirmed. "The camera comes back online and Fash is already down. Whatever happened in between, we don't have a visual." Arun was still looking at the frozen frame, the last image before the cut, which showed Gregor Fash walking alone down the corridor with the slightly aggressive stride of a man who decided he was heading somewhere important. "The other incidents," he said. "2 more passengers reported hearing sounds in the walls last night," Marin said. "Scratching, moving. I thought it was a maintenance issue with the hull insulation. Now I'm not sure." Arun leaned back in his chair. The ship hummed around them, the deep, comfortable bone resonance of a vessel in FTL transit that Marin had spent years learning to find soothing. Right now it didn't help. "Administrator Witt is going to have opinions," Arun said. He meant the Colonial Affairs representative traveling with the passenger manifest, a bureaucrat named Jemson Witt who had been a low-grade irritant since they'd cleared Threshold Station. Witt's job was, technically, to liaise between the colonists and the ship's crew. In practice, it meant he attended every common room meal and made speeches. "Administrator Witt's opinions are not the part of this I'm worried about," Marin said. "No," Arun agreed, "they're not." He was quiet again. "Then, how many of the Volkai have been on Deck 4? Marin had been expecting the question. She'd been dreading it for exactly that reason. Not because she thought the Volkai were responsible, but because she knew how the question would spread once other people started asking it, and she knew what it would do to the 8 refugees who had spent 3 weeks slowly, carefully learning that the door wasn't locked. "None of them have been below Deck 2, she said. "I checked the biometric logs." She paused. "Vexareth specifically has been in the common room, the sleeping quarters, and the galley. She spent 2 hours yesterday helping Engineer Tam locate a fault in the secondary water recycler. Tam said she's good with systems." Arun looked at her. "I wasn't suggesting." "I know you weren't," Marin said. "I'm telling you now because someone else will suggest it later, and I want the answer ready." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Seal Deck 4. Don't tell the general passenger manifest about the body yet. I need to think." "We need to tell them something," Marin said. "If there's something on this ship." "I know," Arun said. "Give me 2 hours." Marin didn't give him 2 hours. She gave him 40 minutes, which was how long it took for a passenger named Dara, a young woman, a colonist, traveling with her father and younger brother, to knock on Marin's door in something close to genuine terror, and tell her that she'd seen something moving inside the wall of Corridor 7. Not something small, something large. Marin went to the common room and found Administrator Witt already there, holding court with a cluster of anxious-looking passengers, his voice pitched at the particular frequency of a man who was simultaneously alarmed and determined not to show it. "The captain is handling the situation," he was saying when Marin walked in. "There is no cause for concern. The Srichanfin's daughter is a well-maintained vessel." "Administrator," Marin said. He turned. He had the look of a man who had spent 20 years being the most important person in rooms slightly smaller than the ones he wanted to be in. He didn't like being interrupted. "The passengers need information," Marin said. "Real information. What we know and what we don't know, right now. Before anything else happens. The captain has asked for time to assess." "A man is dead on deck 4, Marin said evenly into the room. The silence that followed was total. Wit's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. She watched him calculate briefly whether it was possible to maintain the pretense now that it had been stripped away in front of 25 people. She watched him decide it wasn't. "The important thing," Marin continued, speaking to the room, not to Wit, "is that we stay together. We don't go anywhere alone. We stay in pairs minimum and we check in with each other every 30 minutes. We've got 43 days of food and water, we've got power, we've got life support. Whatever is on this ship, we are not helpless." She paused. In the far corner of the common room, Vexareth had gone very still. "The Volkai passengers are part of this crew now," Marin said. "They stay with us. We work together. Is that understood?" It wasn't unanimous. She could see the objections forming on several faces, but nobody said it out loud, and that was enough for now. It was Vexareth who told her what it was. Marin found her later, in the corridor outside the sleeping quarters, crouched low against the wall with her secondary limbs drawn tight against her body, and her antennae moving in small, rapid sweeps that Marin had learned over the past 3 weeks meant she was frightened. "You know what this is," Marin said, not a question. The alien's secondary eyelids flicked 3 times. "I have heard the name spoken on 3 worlds," she said, "always in the past tense, always as something that could not be survived." She explained it carefully in the flat, precise standard that she used when she was concentrating. The Volkai had a word for them, the 100 crawl, in rough translation, ancient things, predatory in a way that went beyond biology, beyond hunger. They had no fixed form. They moved between bodies, leaving the previous host as an empty shell. They chose new hosts with intention, following something chemical, something in the blood, something that let them extend the chain of possession almost indefinitely as long as they kept moving. "The woman," Vexareth said, "the young one who heard sounds in the wall." "Dara. What about her?" "She has the marker. I can detect it from close proximity. It is a scent, not exactly, something in the cellular chemistry. I noticed it when you introduced us. The 100 crawl can detect it from much farther away." A pause. "Among my people, those who carry the marker are considered sacred. In the old texts, the 100 crawl considered them sustaining. A host with the marker can carry the creature almost indefinitely. The creature does not want to leave." Marin was quiet for a moment. "Can it tell who else has the marker?" The secondary eyelids. "I believe so." "Can you?" A long pause. "Yes." "Then I need your help," Marin said. There were 3 of them. Marin was one, Dara was another. The third was a quiet older man named Singh who had said almost nothing for the entire transit, and who, when Vexareth identified him, received the news with the same composure he'd applied to everything else, and simply asked what he could do to help. They met in the galley with the door sealed. Marin, Dara, Singh, Vexareth, and the engineer Tam, because Marin trusted Tam and because she needed someone who understood the ship's systems better than she did. She also brought Dara's brother, a young man named Lek, because Dara had refused to be separated from him, and Marin understood, viscerally, why. "The problem," Marin said, "is that we don't know who it's in now." "It was in Fash when he died," Tam said. "Or it was in something that killed Fash and then left." If it left, it's in someone else. Marin looked around the table. Everyone looked back at her. This was the part that was going to be hard. We need a way to identify it. Vexarath says she can sense the marker in the three of us. Can she sense the creature? Vexarath's antennae moved. The occupied host has a different chemical signature from an unoccupied one, but the creature is intelligent. If it knows it is being searched for, it may be able to suppress the signature. So we can't just line everyone up and have you sniff them, Tam said. Not reliably. Marin had been thinking. She'd been thinking since she'd stood over Gregor Fash's body and done her 30 seconds of controlled breathing. And she'd been thinking harder since Vexarath had told her what they were dealing with. And she'd been thinking hardest of all about the thing her mother used to say to her when she was a child afraid of the dark. Her mother had been a practical woman, a woman who worked with her hands, and her advice had always been grounded in the same bedrock principle. If you can't see a thing, make the thing come to you. We use bait, Marin said. The table was quiet. We let it think it has a chance to take one of us, she continued. One of the three with the marker. We make it look like we're alone. We make it look like an opportunity. And we be ready. And then what? Lek asked. He was maybe 22, bright, scared, trying hard not to show the scared. He reminded Marin of herself at that age. And then we find out what it doesn't know about human beings, Marin said. There was a thing that Marin had done, twice in her life, in circumstances that she didn't talk about at dinner parties. She had been afraid enough to feel it in her teeth, in the joints of her fingers, in the back of her throat, and she had kept moving anyway. Not because she was brave, she had never thought of herself as brave, and she distrusted people who used the word freely about themselves, but because the alternative was to stop moving, and stopping moving had never once solved anything. She hummed while she worked. It was an old song, something her mother had sung while cooking, the kind of tune that doesn't have words but lives in the body, and she hummed it quietly while she and Tam rigged the secondary reactor housing on Deck 3 into something that was technically a trap, and technically several violations of colonial transport safety codes. You're going to walk in there and stand next to that thing, Tam said. He wasn't asking. Yes. You know it might get to you before we can trigger the vent. I know. Tam was a compact, quiet man who had been an engineer on colonial vessels for longer than Marin had been alive, and who had the deliberate hands of someone who had learned, early, that haste was a form of waste. He worked without rushing, checking each connection twice. My daughter is on Kepler Station, he said after a while. Hasn't called in 8 months, probably won't until she needs something. He paused. I figure I'd like to see her again before I decide whether to be annoyed about that. Then let's not die, Marin said. He looked at her, almost smiled. Yes, he said, let's not. The bait was Marin herself. It hadn't been the plan, exactly. The plan had involved Dara, who had volunteered immediately, with a flat-eyed steadiness that Marin had taken a few minutes to talk her out of, but at the last moment Marin had changed her mind, because Dara had a brother who would follow her into the reactor housing regardless of what he was told to do, and Marin couldn't afford that variable. She sent Dara and Lek and Seen to the common room. She told Vexarath to stay near Administrator Witt, who had, over the past 12 hours, gone from obstruction to useful assistance in the way that frightened people sometimes did when they realized that their status was not going to save them. She told Tam to be ready. Then she walked, alone, down Corridor 7, past the wall where Dara had heard the sounds, and into the secondary maintenance bay on Deck 3. She was humming. She didn't stop humming even when she heard the air pressure change, even when the quality of the silence behind her shifted in the specific way that silence shifts when something is moving in it. She didn't stop when she heard the sound, not quite a footstep, not quite a scrape, something between the two, the sound of a body that had once been human being navigated by something that had never learned the exact articulation of human joints. She turned around. The host body was a woman she recognized, one of the colonists from Deck 2, a quiet woman in her late 30s who had sat near Marin at a briefing 3 weeks ago and asked sensible questions about water rations. She was standing in the entrance of the maintenance bay, and she was looking at Marin, and her face was doing something that a human face would not do, a small unconscious series of adjustments that spoke to something behind the eyes, recalibrating its understanding of the situation. "You're not what you were expecting," Marin said. "You were expecting Dara." The thing in the body did not answer. The secondary eyelids, and she had them, Marin noticed, the same flicking reflex that Vexarath had, which meant the host body had been used long enough for the creature's responses to bleed into the external musculature, flicked rapidly. "Here's something you should know about humans," Marin said. She kept her voice conversational. She kept it level. She was not humming anymore. She was talking, which was what she did when she was most afraid, because her mother had also told her that words were a kind of armor, and she had believed it ever since. "We are not the biggest thing out here. We are not the strongest. We are not the oldest or the most ancient or the most feared." She took a step backward toward the reactor housing. "We are, however, extremely stubborn." She hit the trigger with her heel. The plasma vent was not lethal to a human being in the maintenance bay. That was the relevant safety code she had not violated. But it was lethal to a creature whose biology was based on a biochemistry that operated at significantly lower temperatures. And the secondary effect of the pressure wave knocked the host body cleanly off its feet and into the wall hard enough that, when the colonist woman came around 40 minutes later, being held gently by Vexarath in the common room, while Tam ran diagnostics and Marin sat across the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of broth, she had a concussion and 2 cracked ribs and no memory of the previous 19 hours. She also, Vexarath confirmed quietly, no longer carried the signature. The creature was dead. This was not, Marin thought, how any of them had expected the night to go. The aftermath took longer than the crisis. This was always how it went in Marin's experience. The crisis had a shape, a beginning, a duration, an end, and you could hold yourself together for the shape of it because the shape gave you something to brace against. The aftermath was shapeless. It was paperwork and questions and the particular exhaustion of people who had been frightened and were now trying to remember how to be normal again. Administrator Witt wrote a full report, which was professionally thorough and which attributed somewhat more credit to the administrative structure of the manifest than the event strictly warranted, but Marin had stopped expecting anything different from Witt, and it seemed unkind to take it personally. Tam fixed the secondary water recycler and 3 other faults he'd identified while they were working on the reactor housing. Dara spent a day sleeping and then emerged from the sleeping quarters and immediately went a Feinlech, and Marin watched them walk together toward the galley and felt, unexpectedly, something very close to joy. Seeing, who had received the information that he was a target for an ancient parasitic predator with complete composure, took up the habit of playing a small card game with 2 of the younger Vokai passengers. He taught them the rules. They taught him a game that appeared to involve stacking small objects in unstable configurations, and then waiting. Neither game was fully comprehensible to the other party, but they played every afternoon. Marin did her paperwork. She was doing it, headphones in, coffee cooling, the familiar rhythm of incident forms and biometric logs. When Vexarath appeared at the entrance to the intake office and stood there in the Vokai posture, that meant she was waiting to be acknowledged rather than waiting to be ignored. "Come in," Marin said. Vexarath came in. She sat in the chair across from Marin's desk, the same position she'd occupied in the common room on that first night, but differently now. Not the seat nearest the exit, not the seat farthest from the warmth. "I wanted to explain something," the alien said. Marin waited. What you did, Vexarath said carefully. Walking into the maintenance bay, knowing what was coming, I have been trying to understand it according to the frameworks I know, and I cannot. Among my kind, the one who carries the marker is the one who is protected. The one who is moved to safety. You carry the marker. You did not move to safety. You moved toward the danger specifically because you carry the marker. The antennae moved. Why? Marin thought about this for a moment. She thought about her mother's kitchen, about the song without words that lived in the body. She thought about Gregor Fash, who had been a small and unpleasant man, and who was still a dead man, and who deserved to have the thing that killed him stopped. She thought about Dara and Lek. She thought about Seeing's complete composure. Because the other people with the marker had reasons to live that were more immediate than mine, she said finally. Dara's got her brother, Seeing's got his card game. She picked up her coffee cup. I've got paperwork. The secondary eyelids, 3 times rapid. And then Marin had not seen this before, had not read about it in any pamphlet. A slow, deliberate lowering of the antennae, almost to horizontal, which she didn't have a name for yet, but which felt unmistakably like gratitude. The cup, Vexarath said. On the first night, was it a gift or an obligation? Marin considered. Both, she said. I think it was both. They hit the Kepler system approach on day 61, 1 day ahead of schedule, because Vexarath had identified an efficiency in the approach vector that Tam, reviewing it, had called quietly remarkable, and had then spent 40 minutes asking follow-up questions about Voakai navigational methodology. The deceleration burn lit the viewport in amber and gold, the light of a star that none of them had seen in 2 months pouring into the common room where most of the passengers had gathered, the way people always gathered for arrival, because arrival meant something regardless of what you'd left behind, because arrival was the thing you could be sure of, the specific human, and apparently Voakai, and apparently every being that had ever crossed the dark between stars, need to know that the journey was real. Vexarath stood next to Marin at the viewport. What is the human word, she said, for the feeling when a place that was not your home becomes your home? Marin looked at the amber light. We've got a few, she said. Depends how long it takes. And if it takes a lifetime, then we call it home, Marin said. The Srichinfin's daughter dropped out of FTL into the Kepler approach corridor at 0718 ship time. All systems nominal, all passengers accounted for, and Marin Schultz filed her incident report and her manifest log and her biometric records, and she noted in the supplemental field, which nobody ever read, which was not technically required, which she filled in anyway because she had always believed the record mattered, that the transit had been unusual in several respects, and that the crew had conducted themselves with distinction, and that the Voakai passengers had been a material asset to the safety and success of the voyage, and that she recommended they be given full colonist status on arrival. Then she closed the file, put her headphones in, and finished her coffee. 3 months later, Marin was in her office at Kepler Station, processing a new manifest for the return transit when there was a knock at the door. Vexarath looked different in colonist clothes. Broader, somehow, or maybe, that was just what happened when someone stopped carrying themselves like they were waiting to be struck. She had a secondary limb full of what appeared to be structural drawings, and her antennae were up, and her secondary eyelids were doing the fast triple flick that Marin had long since decoded as amusement. I have accepted a position with the station's engineering cohort, she said, the builder's line. That's good, Marin said. That's really good. They have assigned me an office. A pause. It is near the thermal exchange units. It is very warm. The antennae moved. I wanted you to know. Marin leaned back in her chair. Outside her window, the station turned slowly in the light of a star that was not the one she had grown up under, and the common room next door was already filling with new passengers, new faces, new stories beginning the long work of becoming themselves in a place they hadn't been before. How is Seeing? She asked. Still playing the card game. He has now lost consistently to Rekvara for 9 consecutive days and claims this is strategy. It might be. It is not, Vexarath said, but he is happy, and Rekvara is also happy. So it seems the outcome is the same. Marin looked at her for a moment, this alien woman who had sat in a corner waiting to be processed, and who had ended up crouching in a maintenance corridor, explaining the nature of an ancient predator to a human intake officer, who had then walked into a reactor room humming a song she didn't remember learning. And she thought about the gap between what a thing is and what it can become, and how the distance between those 2 points is almost never as fixed as it looks from the outside. You could come with us, Marin said. The return transit, I could use someone who knows what the approach vectors look like from the inside. The antennae stilled. Is this an obligation or a gift? Vexarath said. Marin smiled. Neither, she said. It's a job offer, which is different. The secondary eyelids flicked. The antennae rose, and in the Volkai woman's face, in the compound amber eyes and the careful, deliberate posture of someone who had learned, slowly and against all prior expectation, that the door was not locked, Marin read something she recognized from the mirror, from her own face on her own best mornings. The specific, unguarded expression of someone deciding, for the first time or the 100th, to go somewhere new. Yes, Vexarath said, I will come. Outside, the station turned. The light was warm. The Srichanfin's daughter left Kepler Station 8 days later with a full manifest, a new approach vector courtesy of her Volkai navigator, and 2 passengers fewer than she'd planned for because Dara and Lek had decided, after all, to stay. Dara had sent Marin a message the night before departure. It was short. She was not, apparently, a person who needed many words to make her meaning clear, which was a quality Marin had always respected. The message said, You told us we weren't helpless. I wanted you to know I believe you now. Marin read it twice. She saved it to the supplemental field of the manifest log, which nobody ever read, next to her note about Volkai colonist status and the incident report, and the biometric records that told the dry official story of 43 days in the dark with something ancient and hungry. Then she sealed the hatch and sat down at the navigator's console next to Vexarath, and they looked at the approach vector together, and Marin said, All right, show me how you do it. And the Srichanfin's daughter moved out into the dark, and the light fell behind them, and they went.